Good afternoon, everyone. I almost said good morning. Usually when I'm standing up here, it's just approaching 10:30. Thank you very much for everyone for coming today. That's awesome to see a great group of people here. Just a few minutes earlier, I checked to see if anyone in the sanctuary here was new to us, but since everyone knows the sanctuary, then you know that when we leave, you leave through the side door to your left, so that there's a nice flow of people going out the same direction. If you need a little extra time, just wait for a couple of minutes, and just you can leave through the main entrance. So if anyone and also needs the washrooms, they're just through the sanctuary there to your right. That's it. There's a basket at the entrance. Please be generous. On Sunday mornings, you hear me or Reverend Krista Elizabeth acknowledging the land that we're on. And so to Reverend Krista Elizabeth and I know to all of you as well, those are not just words, okay? Those are things that we may not think about all the time, but they're there. And so when Margaret brought in the article on Jarvis Googoo, I thought, yeah, this is an excellent opportunity for our church to better know the situation that we are in today, in 2021, because there's been a lot of stuff that got us to where we are here today. So I got in touch with Jarvis the best way that I could through email, and here he is today. And so we're very, 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 very happy to have Jarvis with us today. Jarvis was raised in Wakagama, Unamakik. Okay, you can talk about that after. All right, Jarvis attended an Indian day school and graduated from a Mi'kmaq, I'm going to try this one, Kinamatnawe, okay, school. He holds degrees from St. Mary's University, cum laude, Dalhousie Law School, and is a non-practicing member of the Nova Scotia Barristers Society. He joined the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nations Chiefs Secretariat in July of 2013, where he is the Associate Director of Health. He has spoken and presented at many events, including Dalhousie Law School and Dalhousie Medical School, and led the development of the Donald Marshall Jr. Memorial Award. He also possesses knowledge on the Indigenous law and Mi'kmaq history, culture, and language, often acting as a cultural language resource and liaison. He is an avid runner and volunteers on the Run Nova Scotia Management Board, and an award-winning group fitness instructor. He lives in Jipuktuk. Okay, Dartmouth. That's Dartmouth?
It's the HRM, essentially.
HRM.
But there's
Okay.
planning for specific areas within the region.
Right on.
Yeah, I'll send you a map. It's
Okay.
a very fun one.
Jipuktuk.
Bukduk.
Oh, Tuk.
Yeah.
Dartmouth. With his wife, Carrie Ann, and you'll never guess their dog's name. Lulu.
Wife's idea.
Carrie Ann,
It was my wife's idea for that one.
It was your wife's idea?
Yeah.
So Carrie Ann and their dog Lulu. So without further delay, I very much from the bottom of my heart love to welcome Jarvis Googoo.
See? Test? Okay. Oh. the funny thing with both running, I use headphones that are very similar to this. And when you start a race, you wear a mask. So it's always a little tricky when you start the race. You're allowed to remove your mask because you're outdoors and it's safe. And I still have the same problem. Same with teaching. So thank you very much for that wonderful introduction there, Shane. And before I formally begin and start with everything, I was chat with Shane last week just about some ideas about how I would open some of this there. So a quick thing I want to explain before I would formally start is basically an idea, or not so much of an idea, but more of an example of a Mi'kmaq prayer. So I explained to Shane that when Mi'kmaq people hunt, so whether it would be for example, a moose, it's not just food per se from a moose. Moose are large animals. Moose, historically, the body of a moose was able to provide so much. Some brief examples, of course, would be the meat itself, but the moose's hide could be used as clothing as well as for doors of our traditional shelters, which we would call wigwams, which were also made from birch bark trees. The surrounding of wigwams were birch bark. The doors themselves were actually animal hide, and the moose was a great one. And of course, with the size of the moose, its hide was also used as clothing. And so traditionally when we hunted, and after we would take down a moose, one of the first things we've always did is what we prayed at the body of the moose. We would give thanks to the spirit of the moose for, well, I would say essentially sacrificing itself, or it's given itself up to us so that we could eat food, so we could use its body, bones for tools and jewelry, its hide for clothing, our doorways to help us live. And so we say a prayer to give thanks to the body of the moose for that, because one of our fears of superstition was a famine. If we just took the moose's body, or took more bodies than necessary to feed ourselves, to clothe ourselves, to help us live, our fear was that the spirit of that animal would go to the other animals, and they would say, the Mi'kmaq are being disrespectful to us. They did not show appreciation when they killed us and then used our body and did not give us thanks. So the fear was they would tell the other animals that, and then the other animals would leave the area, which would potentially result in a famine for Mi'kmaq people, which either means, okay, we'll have to find something else, or we would have to gather up everything and move to another area. So there's always that little superstition, that belief that we did not want to be disrespectful for the animals. So we always would say a prayer to an animal's body every time we hunted it in order to help feed ourselves. We wanted to show appreciation and gratitude for that. So basically, I just wanted to start off with that. Going to this now again. So formally, I'm going to try to get off script here, but it's more like my speaking notes. Again, I want to thank Shane for this opportunity to speak. It's about reconciliation, but at the same time, I do also want to make this an opportunity about Mi'kmaq history and culture and language. I'll share a few ideas, not a few ideas, but I want to share a few things, and then I would love to invite any opportunity for questions and answers. I will answer to the best of my ability. So, as you may know, back on September 30th was the first time we had a federal statutory recognition for a Truth and Reconciliation Day throughout the country. Here in Mi'kmaq, I was saying treaties here are based upon peace and friendship, and as you know, I did Shane did reach out to me in October. Unfortunately, I was not able to come until today. So this is worded in the sense of 2 months ago, but I want to make it relevant. As you know, in Nova Scotia, October is Mi'kmaq History Month. And October 1st is known as Treaty Day here in the region. Former Mi'kmaq Grand Chief Donald Marshall Sr. declared October 1st as Treaty Day in 1986. And this was after the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed that the Treaty of 1752 was still valid. Former Premier John Savage declared October 1st as Treaty Day in 1993. And all this was decades before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, I will refer to as from now on, released its final report and calls to action, which you may know was in 2015. Sections 114 to 122 of the Indian Act gave the federal government power to establish the Indian residential school system and to remove Indigenous children from their homes and families and to relocate them at these schools. While the last Indian residential school closed in 1996, and these sections were just in the books, they were not being used as a gesture of reconciliation. In 2014, a year before the CRC's final report and calls to action came out, in 2014, the federal government either amended or repealed these sections. They were not being used anymore. And if they actually attempted to use them, the lawyer in me firmly believes the charter would have smashed that right on the spot there. The TRC's work is critical and important towards the journey of peace and friendship and truth and reconciliation here in Mi'kma'ki. But I always like to say that it's important to remember, while the TRC does have its 94 calls to action, the TRC itself, on its own, cannot be the only source of peace and friendship and reconciliation here within Mi'kma'ki. The Royal Commission on the Donald Marshall Jr. prosecution had 82 recommendations on addressing justice for Native people. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, or RCAP, had over 440 recommendations come out. This was in 1996. The final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls had 231 calls to justice. There are numerous other reports and public inquiries with many recommendations. And unfortunately, I firmly believe there will be more inquiries coming out into the future as well. Much has been written on these issues by Indigenous authors and what can and should be done. These inquiries and these reports, combined and taken together with their calls to actions and their recommendations, do create large and powerful steps towards truth and reconciliation. That said, they are not the only ones. As we know, tragedies and injustices should not have to occur for action to take place. For those who may remember this past spring, when 215 remains of children were confirmed at a former Indian residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada reacted. Many Canadians wanted to learn more about these schools, what happened here, and to ensure future generations would know this too. And for me, while I do admire this and I appreciate it, remember that the TRC's report has been out for several years now, but it's never too late to learn about what happened. As I always say, if you wish to learn more specifically about the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School, which was only 40 minutes up the road from here, I always say and encourage people to read Isabel Knockwood's Out of the Depths, which was one of the earliest accounts of the Indian residential schools. The site, as you know, is you may or may not know, the site today is a National Historic Site declared back on September 30th. You may wish to visit it. It's just maybe 5 or 10 minutes off the highway when you drive by Shubenacadie Way there. And since 2015, as we know, more and more remains have been found throughout Canada at former Indian residential school sites. And sadly, I don't even know the exact number today. I know it, as you know, it started with 215. Last I checked, it was over 7,000. I can't name the schools because there are so many of them. But that said, when we talk about reconciliation, I see more Mi'kmaq flags here and there. So, for example, this past July, doing the Nova Scotia Marathon in Barrington, which is in I had to play my geography here, southwestern Nova Scotia, just outside of Yarmouth there. Just doing the route there. I saw just some houses with Mi'kmaq flags. Along where I live, I see, orange hearts, and I do see signs about every child matters. Someone on my street does have a Mi'kmaq flag hanging in their backyard. I do want to meet them sometime. I just don't want to go up to the house randomly just to say hi. I'm waiting for them to be on their driveway sometime there. And so, like as I was saying, we see flags, we see signs. I've had the opportunity to be invited here today, from Shane's invite. I spoke at a few other events, Sparks, Brownies, Cubs, Boy Scouts, Scouts Canada, sorry, Scouts Canada. And as you know, recently here in the province with the provincial government, we've had additional signages being done. And was one of the articles I believe that Shane may have been referring to. I did an article back in the spring, summer, going into the fall in Cape Breton. We had where I'm originally from, you had the sign, "Welcome to Cape Breton." They have another one there now, Jalasi Unamagik, which means "Welcome to the island," essentially in our language. And those aren't. Sorry, one sec there. And as I was saying, we see signs. I see more orange hearts, more symbols, more Mi'kmaq flags, and these, to me, these are thoughtful acts. And I think one of the best parts I like is these are not legally mandated nor legislated, but to me, it's a thoughtful gesture towards reconciliation with the heart and emphasis of peace and friendship. Obviously, strictly speaking, you are not required to wear an orange shirt on September 30th or any other time of the year, but I do say it is a thoughtful gesture. And I say the law, yes, it does have a place for reconciliation. And I say, so do you, so do all of us. How we learn from this, how we learn afterwards, and then how we act upon it is a step, is a gesture towards reconciliation. And I always tell and I always emphasize to people who ask me, don't think that any little step you do now is too small. Because even babies' first steps, may or may not for those with children who've seen babies with taking baby steps, babies' first steps, they are celebrated, they are commended, and we are over the moon when babies take their first steps. And then after a while, babies start walking, and then walking becomes an everyday normal thing. And I always like to say and believe that maybe one day reconciliation becomes an everyday normal thing. And to get there, I always say and emphasize that it does start with baby steps. So for some of those I'm going to shut this here. So as you've seen me come in earlier, I've been carrying this. And for those who may or may not know, this is sweetgrass. It is a natural grass that grows around here in Mi'kmaq. I don't know how to pick it here on the mainland. How I was taught to pick it was back in Cape Breton from my grandmother and one of my more elder aunts. Typically, if you find it in the swampish area. I don't like saying the word swamp, just doesn't sound nice, but swamps are natural. It's normally green. The root base of it is normally purple. You can smell it in the air. But when you pick sweetgrass, you don't burn it right away. You let it dry out a couple days, couple weeks, and then it gets brown. But it ends up keeping a law of life in it left, I find, for whatever reason. Normally, I would demonstrate it smudging, but we are not going to. It's an indoor facility. But I do want to explain, normally when we pray and smudge with sweetgrass, we would take the end of it. As you can tell, I'm not sure if you can tell, up here it's burnt a little bit. So this honestly will last me many years, only probably because I don't use it every day. I do keep sweetgrass in my car with me as I travel, along with sage. And normally when you burn it, you get a bit of a flame on there, and then you extinguish it right away. So there'll be some leftover amber, and then smoke comes out. And personally, I'm not a smoker anymore, but the smoke that comes out from here doesn't bother me. It's a very pleasant, nice smell. And traditionally, we as Mi'kmaq people, when we would smudge, I'm gonna have to just put this down. But usually, when we smudge, someone would have the sweetgrass holding it for you, or you would hold it yourself. Sometimes people will wave the smoke away with an eagle feather, and other times we'll just use our hands. Typically, I just use my hands. And what we would do is kind of take the smoke from it and kind of like put it towards our face and towards our heart. And one of the reasons we smudge this way, usually we'll sometimes do it before a meeting. Sometimes we do it as a part of a ceremony. We've always believed that when you smudge, it's kind of like, for lack of a better term, a cleanse. Clean your mind, clean your thoughts, you clean your heart. So especially before a meeting, so the meeting could, you want to set a positive vibe and create a positive atmosphere before you would start things. So normally, when I speak to you, usually with youth, I find with Cubs or Scouts or Brownies, Girl Guides, usually because they're about in grade 2, grade 3. And if you know children that young, sometimes it's hard to keep their attention. So I always usually like to just demonstrate a smudge in before them, allow them to participate if they wish to do so. And usually I find they're very receptive there. So like I said, normally I would do a smudge, but we're just not going to today. So the other thing I probably like to say is sometimes a great question I get, and I decide to actually have this, in case somebody, it might come up as a question, but I'm going to actually just give this as a part of my presentation here today, is when we say Mi'kma'ki. And Mi'kma'ki historically may or may not you've heard translates in Mi'kmaq to the land of the Mi'kmaq, our traditional territory. And sometimes, and I've done other presentations and questions, and one question I get sometimes is a very simple, what can we do? And like I said, I could go on with books, royal commissions, recommendations, reports, inquiries. I could name all kinds of things. But sometimes I am asked, what is the simplest thing you can start off? And for me, I always say is know the land, know the territory. Going out west might get more complicated. Provinces get bigger. Here, at least with Nova Scotia, it's simple because Nova Scotia is Mi'kmaq land. However, Mi'kmaq land is not just Nova Scotia itself. It does encompass Prince Edward Island, and recently it does now have Newfoundland. When you get to New Brunswick, it is New Brunswick. It is not all of New Brunswick. I do explain to people. Our traditional territory, what breaks off us going that way, is not the New Brunswick-Nova Scotia border at Amherst and by Sackville. That was not our territory. Our territory kept going until the St. John River. And then once you were on the other side of the St. John River, it is then becomes the territory of the Wolastoqey Nation, of the Maliseet people. And then afterwards, you would go upwards in New Brunswick, eastern, northern New Brunswick. Then you would keep going till you get to the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec. That is still a part of Mi'kma'ki, and there are Mi'kmaq communities up there. So sometimes when I'm asked, oh, gee, yes, thank you, perfect. You get pointed. I'm like, am I on a time limit? No, okay. Oh yes, yes, perfect. And yeah, so as you can see, and I wasn't going to mention this, but thank you for putting it up there. The Passamaquoddy Nation does spill into New Brunswick a bit as well. And of course, the Maliseet territory, it is some of Quebec. Looks like it's a bit of Maine. It's mostly more western New Brunswick. Mi'kmaq territory goes straight up-ish more. Then you get into the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec. Ironically enough, I was talking to my wife, and I've been telling her, because I explained a lot of Mi'kmaq territory and history to her. Thank you so much for pulling that map up there. So up there, it would be Gaspé. That's what it's called in Mi'kmaq. And it literally translates to the last land or land's end. We called it that because that was the end of our territory. That's where we stopped. And then I always say, when you go out further, it's someone else's territory, and I'm like, go from there. So when I talk to people, to me, this is how I see the territory, and this is how I discuss things. A couple of weeks ago, I won't say names, but there was an organization that works in health in Nova Scotia. It's based in Amherst. They reached out to me, and they wanted to learn more about Mi'kmaq culture, but they wanted to learn from someone local. And they told me that the closest community was Millbrook First Nation. I said, no, it's not. If you're in Amherst, your closest Mi'kmaq community is Fort Folly First Nation. Just go on to what's called the New Brunswick side. It's literally 20 minutes once you drive into New Brunswick. That's actually a lot cheaper to have someone come in from the community to go to Amherst than having someone from Millbrook come on in. I know it's a New Brunswick, Nova Scotia border. For me, I know it's there, but I also don't see it that way as well too. In PEI, I'm not sure if it's a high school or if it was UPEI that did this. They just recently started displaying a map of North America. But within that North American map, it's neat. They don't distinguish Canada, United States, provinces, nor the states themselves. It's strictly a map of the historical Indigenous nations peoples of where they would side historically throughout that map of North America. It's a fascinating map. If I could ever buy it somewhere in print form, I'll take it. The other thing I want to say, the reason I always talk about the territory of this is because a couple of weeks ago, and I know she had great intentions, and I know she meant well, but I think she was doing it wrong. I had a friend of mine in Toronto. She works as a school teacher as a day job. She asked me if I could virtually speak to her class about Mi'kmaq history. And I told her no. The reason is because I said, you're in Toronto, you're into the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit, and I know there's two other nations, and I apologize for not knowing them off the top of my head. And I said, you're asking me coming out all the way from out east to present to students in the land that is not mine. My directive to you is this. Reach out to the First Nations territory of where you are at. You learn their history. Their history will be different than my history. There's going to be a lot of similarities. The Indian Act affected all of us. Colonialism, assimilation, residential schools, it does affect all of us, and it has. It may affect the people, the indigenous people in your territory. It may have affected them differently than mine. And this is why when I'm asked, can I speak to something, it's not a problem around here. No, as you can see, all of Nova Scotia falls within Mi'kmaq. If I'm in New Brunswick, if I'm asked to speak, I do ask where you at. And if you told me I'm in Fredericton, then I would tell you, you need to get a Wolastoqey person to speak to you. I should not be addressing Mi'kmaq history and culture and rights in someone else's land. And it's fun. And another thing I do share with people is when I talk about land acknowledgements, is if I go out west to speak elsewhere, so usually with my job, I do travel for health. With my day job in health, I do travel sometimes. When I was in downtown Vancouver and I was addressing one of our sessions at a workshop, I said, I'm Mi'kmaq from out west. To the host nation of the Coast Salish people, I thank you for letting me speak and to address your crowd or to address the event. When I'm in Banff, I give thanks to Treaty 7. And I say, I come as a visitor from out west, and I thank you for hosting here. I'm here to speak about health back in the Atlantic and more details about that. So going back to my teacher friend, I told her, if you do want me to speak, I won't mind doing it. But you absolutely need to ensure you have a First Nations person who is of the area of Toronto, Mississaugas New Credit. They should be speaking first. And if they are okay with it, and if they give me permission, I'll speak to the Mi'kmaq history in their land, which I don't mind sharing, which I don't mind doing, but I want them as the host nation to be speaking first. And I firmly do believe that as well. And I guess for me, I do the reverse example. If because the question that comes up sometimes is if we are here, and I would question Shane if he said, "Okay, we want to talk about reconciliation. We are going to get a Blackfoot person to come in here to talk about the Indian residential school." And I'm like, okay, um, they probably might be able to address it more so with the residential schools that are in Blackfoot territory. They may have superly studied it here. They may have studied our treaties. They may have learned our language. And I would appreciate that, but I would also question that. Why? Because I would say someone else would have to question if I was addressing elsewhere. And so to me, that always takes it back to looking at the territory there. So if I or any other Mi'kmaq person was ever asked to speak in Quebec, I said in the Gaspé area, sure, I would do it. But if you say, can you speak in Montreal? I would say no. I would tell you, go reach out to the Mohawk Nation. Ask them to speak about what happened to them in Montreal. Ask them to talk about Oka. I cannot do that. It's not necessarily my history per se. And I do know, and as I said, with the Indian Act and colonization, yes, it has affected all of us. But you got to remember, the treaties here in Mi'kma'ki, they start off peace and friendship. They're not land surrender. Those treaties were based back in the 1700s. By the time you get to Alberta, further out west, you're going to have different treaties that will go back. I think the latest one may have been the early 1900s, might be 1901. I don't remember. Vast majority of them would be the 1800s. Most of those were also created after Confederation in 1867. And so when presented, that's always the biggest answer, and it's a long answer when people ask me what I could do. And the first thing I always say is, just know what land you're on. So we're here today. It's not a problem. As you can also tell, Nova Scotia is a small province, so it's almost like a no-brainer, really. New Brunswick, basically, it's the river, and then going up north, Gaspé, the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec, still not so much of an issue, and then going out west. I always like to personally wonder sometimes, though, if there would be like an actual formal welcome sign around the Gaspé Peninsula. I know we have one outside of Amherst. I do like the sign. Theoretically, I would say I would actually like to put the sign right when you cross the St. John River. Because strictly speaking, that's probably where I believe the sign should go. But that would just be me. The other thing I would like to share with you is a bit about our language. I'm not giving a language lesson per se. Instead, it's about the breakup and breakdown fun. I am a fan of CBC Radio. I usually believe on Tuesdays they have Bernie Francis who speaks. Yeah, see a hand up there, so I think someone knows they listen to that one too. Bernie is not only a friend of mine, he's also one of my teachers. I attended a Mi'kmaq immersion camp to learn more so about the language. I kind of also take a bit as an amateur linguist with it because I am fascinated with the breakdown and meaning behind words. Mi'kmaq is very verb oriented. For example, over indoors. Well, we're over there. I presume that's an artificial tree. Yeah. So naturally, it's an evergreen tree. Those flowers there are red, and I am using English to describe what those colors are for you. But in Mi'kmaq, colors are verbs. They are verbs because colors change. If I took my shirt and I just threw it on the parking lot, it's black. It's winter's almost here. Give it a few days, give it a few weeks. This shirt's going to fade. It becomes a different color. It changes. Leaves come out in the spring and the summer, but leaves change by the time you get to the fall there. They become yellow, they become red, they become orange. Colors change. And that's why when we speak about colors in Mi'kmaq, we see it in a state of flux. It's always moving, always changing. And the other neat thing I love to describe to people is the sun. In Mi'kmaq, our word for sun in Mi'kmaq is Naguset. But I always try to emphasize and explain to people, it does not literally translate to the word sun, spelled in English as S-U-N. The word Naguset literally means it shines at day. Because when you look up, you look around, what is the brightest thing in the daytime? The closest star in our solar system, the sun. So it really, literally means it shines at day. And at night, our word for moon is Depkanuset. It does not literally translate to moon, or as you spell it, Moon. It literally means it shines at night. Although scientifically we know it's actually the moon's reflecting light off the sun, but nevertheless, it shines at night. And why? We're talking about not what it is. We talk about what it's doing. What is the verb with it? It's shining. Same with Naguset. And we're just describing something. So the other thing Bernie taught me, which really fascinates me, is you could theoretically take that word, you could apply it to anything else. So for example, if the moon was not out, let's say it's a new moon, and let's say it's overcast. And if I took a spotlight, or if I created a massive bonfire, and it became bright somewhere at night, or well, I don't think a fire is a good example. I would say more of a spotlight there, I would say. And all of a sudden, it shines bright at night. I asked Bernie, could I say Depkanuset? He said, you would not be wrong if you said that. Why? We're applying the verb to something, not a noun. So that's one of the most fascinating things about the language. It is something I could really go on and on about. Bernie probably could go much, much longer than I can when I talk about the language this way. The other thing I did want to ask, though, is was, well, actually, I want to give you a little bit of a legal history on trivia as well, too. You might find this fascinating. Just want to go back to my section here. Yes. So earlier, when Shane mentioned Mi'kmaq Ganamwe, I want to give a little history about that, and you'll see how it goes back to Indian residential schools. So throughout the country, well, historically, with the Constitution of Canada, and I'm using the language of the law, they said Indians and lands reserved for Indians fell under federal jurisdiction. And as many of us may know, health, education falls under provincial jurisdiction. So for the last 150 plus years, there's always just been that confusion about how do we as Native people, where do we go for health? Where do we go for education? And of course, jurisdictional basketball. It's not our problem. It's not our problem. Anyway, I did want to, I'm bringing this up because, as I said earlier, sections 114, 122 of the Indian Act, they just allowed the Fed staff power to create Indian residential schools and to basically apprehend children because they felt that parents couldn't take care of them. So I mentioned this because when I mentioned Mi'kmaq Ganamwe is basically what you would consider the provincial board of jurisdiction or provincial department of jurisdiction for Mi'kmaq communities, for Mi'kmaq children, at least with respect to Nova Scotia. It doesn't count the other provinces or the other areas of Mi'kmaq. It's only Nova Scotia. And basically, so if you attend, or if a child is attending a school in a Mi'kmaq community, the jurisdiction on that with respect to education is all operated and directed underneath Mi'kmaq Ganamwe. Their office is based in Membertou First Nation there. The reason I mentioned that is to create Mi'kmaq Ganamwe, which was a first in Canada, and I believe was 1998 or 1999, I don't remember the year it was. The federal and the provincial government simultaneously passed jurisdiction at the same time. They passed an act called the Mi'kmaq Education Act. They passed them both at the same time in order to eliminate any of their roles with respect to education for Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia. And by doing that, it effectively allowed and it effectively created this open blankness, I guess, which basically became our jurisdiction. The Mi'kmaq now have complete jurisdiction over education for Mi'kmaq students in Mi'kmaq communities. The provincial and federal governments don't do anything with it anymore. I cannot speak to the rest of the country about that. The reason I wanted to mention that and what's a bit of a historical first, which I don't think a lot of people know, and it took me some legal research to look into this, is with that act, the Micmac Education Act, being passed by both federal and provincial government, there is a clause in there that states sections 114 to 122 are of no force or effect in Nova Scotia. That means essentially, even though the federal government did formally repeal those sections in 2014 as a gesture of reconciliation, in 1998-1999, by saying sections 114 to 122 are of no force or effect here, Nova Scotia and the Micmac effectively outlawed Indian residential schools about 2 years after the last one closed, and approximately 15 years before the federal government formally and finally eliminated those sections. So it's a little bit of a trivia I like to always share with the law there. I do want to leave an opportunity for anyone here at all who would have any questions about anything. It could be with respect to anything I spoke about today. Likewise, I am very open to answering anything about culture, history, or language as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Sweetgrass and using sweetgrass in ceremonies and that sort of thing. Is it a sign of disrespect if, hypothetically speaking, we did something here without Mi'kmaq presence here? Is that
You know what? That is a great question, and actually, I don't have an actual formal answer to it because I have spoken. I know this was something that came up. I don't want to call it a debate. I don't have another word for it there, but it is something I heard that has come up, and people talk about being non-Mi'kmaq people casually mentioning, "Man, I feel stressed today. I think I'm just going to smudge for a little bit." For me, I always say I don't know. Every time I know my wife doesn't smudge on her own. If she asks to do it, I do it with her as well. I like to say, let me look into that one. I think that is a great question. It's an important one, and I like to ask about it.
I think if our intentions were honorable and we
Yeah.
did it out of as much respect as we can, I personally wouldn't see a problem with it. I would sort of do it as much honor as I could, but I was just wondering if it was out of line. And
In my opinion, for me personally,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No.
Because for me, I'm more of a fan. I don't want to say a fan. I'm more of a proponent and support of sharing our culture,
Yeah.
sharing our language. And to me, I think the coolest, neatest thing would be if you said to the effect, you know what, I am going to give a sermon in Mi'kmaq one day. I'm going to work on it. Could take a while. You might need a lot of engagement work with it. That's okay. And to me, I don't see it as they're stealing our language. The first thing I do is get excited.
They're trying to
And
learn.
like somebody wants to learn our language.
Right.
And so I guess the way I see it is, I don't see that as a problem. If you want to learn the language, and for me, it's if people want to, start things off with a smudge of a sweetgrass, I think to me, I think that is a great thing. I don't know how others may feel about it though. Yeah, but to me, it's a question I myself probably would reach out to an elder to ask. I'm a little iffy on asking my peers. I would definitely ask. For me, I can ask an elder. And so, I can look into that, and I'll just let you know what they may think about it there. So, yeah. Yes. Hmm. Great question. I also like that because I am a lawyer, and I did take intellectual property law in law school. And one of the biggest things that when I mentioned earlier, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, one of their recommendations and gaps they noticed, it kind of addresses what you're saying, was the intellectual property rights of Mi'kmaq people. So I'm not a massive fan of folklore personally. I know I should learn more about it at least, but So we had this. We have a Mi'kmaq creation story about Glooskap, and if you drive through Millbrook First Nation, they have the gigantic statue of it. And I went to Glooskap's cave in Cape Breton, and I know there's creation stories of how he fought big. I don't want to say monsters, but just giant animals and all that. And then to me, if I woke up the next morning and I saw that Pixar is creating the Legend of Glooskap, it's going to go on to make $500 million. My first question is, who's helping you with that? And they're like, no, we just read books. We like it. We're just going to make this movie. We're not going to even call it Mi'kmaq. We're just going to call it Glooskap, and we're going to make up a new tribe. That would be beyond appropriation. It is our stories, and it is our history, and they're making lots of money because Pixar movies make money. That's what they're supposed to do because they're good. But and I guess for kind of an example, I'm gonna go back to your question, but just picking on Pixar here because I do like them. It was like that movie Coco. It's one of my favorite movies ever. And when they were writing it, from my understanding, they took a lot of great engagement work with the Mexican community to talk about the Day of the Dead ceremonies and portraying it in a Pixar movie. From my understanding, they really went above and beyond out of their way to ensure it was as respectful as possible. So I would like to think and hope they would do the same likewise and to cooperate with us with our stories. But to go back to what you were saying about cultural appropriation, I guess legally, financially, the first thing I think about was, are you kind of exploiting the money on this one here? And I guess the other question, to me, it becomes, what if a group of non-Mi'kmaq people wanted to start up a drum group together, call themselves Mi'kmaq singers of some sorts, but they're not Mi'kmaq. They're drumming, they're singing our songs. They're calling themselves Mi'kmaq, but they say but we know they're not. And then they're getting invited to all these, events and functions to perform and to open. To me, in my opinion, that's wrong. So I guess if I was to be objective about it, I'm always usually asking, are you trying to rip us off of some sort? But there's also the further principle of it too with appropriation. Like, I'm trying to think here. And I guess to me, I like to say it probably should not always just be with finances. I don't mind talking about it, about when that's such a great question. Yeah. But no, basically, I would say legally, the best way to probably define or clamp down on it would be to talk about it as not maybe if someone's making money off it. But I'll tell you a side story, which I think it might give a direction towards your answer. And this might sound harsh. I'm kind of a fan of it here, and I know they're doing a bit of it here in Nova Scotia. In January 2020, my wife and I were in Texas, and we were on our way to or from Houston. We pulled over at a gas station on the highway just to grab some snacks. And my wife pointed out to me, "Look, a wallet with some native art on it." So I picked it up. It had like an eel or something on it, whatever. And then I opened up the wallet, and there's a tab in there, a little card, and the card said, "To the purchaser of this or the vendor or whatever, please note this wallet was not made by Native Americans and does not meet the criteria of the Native American Handcrafts Act." I was blown away. And a couple of months ago, I did some research into it, and it is a serious offense, might be a criminal offense, to sell Native American handcrafts in the United States, and you say, "Oh, these are made by Choctaw Nation dream catchers, $20 each." And if they were not made by Choctaw Nation people, you are in deep, deep trouble. So they kind of took a very tough on crime, hard approach with it in the United States. I know here in Nova Scotia, with Mi'kmaq tourism, because it is something we want to promote here as well. I know with Mi'kmaq tourism, the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, I believe they are working with singers, artists, people who share a lot with Mi'kmaq culture. I do believe that they are working with them. So when they sell their art piece work or their stories or whatever they're doing, they could work on, I guess, for lack of a better term, an official seal of authenticity to note that this is actually made by Mi'kmaq people, or this is, I don't want to say a Mi'kmaq authorized event, but it is to note that it was made by us, done by us. I don't know if we'll ever go politically. I don't know if we'll ever go in that direction. And it might be one of those rare times I might say I actually admire the United States law on this because they're just taking a hard approach to protecting their work. The brief history I've read about that is just because a lot of Native tribes were being hurt, that their work was being passed off to big company elsewhere and saying, yes, made by Lumbee people. The Lumbee are of like the Carolinas there, made by the Lumbee people. Buy our baskets today. I'm like, no, that's mass manufactured or, dare I say, sweatshop overseas. That was not handmade, handcrafted here. A side note I would like to tell you too, though, we were in Hawaii in 2019, and I was very conscious about ensuring I was supporting local indigenous Hawaiian families and businesses while we were there. And what was neat was I wanted a Hawaiian shirt, but I said I would only want to buy it in Hawaii. And there was one shop I bought it. It was $50 US, which is a lot of money for just a shirt. But on the inside, it came with a tag and everything that said it's actually made in Hawaii. So they're complying with good local laws. And at the same time, they also said it's actually made by an indigenous Hawaiian family, handmade. So to me, I definitely want to support that. There were other shirts there, but they were much cheaper, and they were made in countries that do have relaxed laws or that would permit sweatshops there. And I said I did not want to support that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I definitely ran around it a lot. And I hope it points in the right direction about the whole cultural appropriation thing. It's a massive thing. Our CAP does talk a lot about it, but I think a lot has been discussed about it since then. So, yeah. Questions? Yeah. Yeah, no problem. No problem. So, before 2015, before 2015, I know the way I read a book by a native author. There I go with that word. Yeah, out west in British Columbia. His name is Calvin Helen, and he wrote a book called Dances with Dependencies, and he broke down the terminology in a lot of it. He was talking about Aboriginal, First Nations. He mentioned the word Indian, etc., and then he said the word Indigenous. And I liked what he was saying at the time. He said Indigenous because the word Aboriginal is in the Canadian Constitution. It's strict. It is a Canadian word. I think they use it in Australia and then New Zealand as well. But if you go to the United States, I don't think they know really what Aboriginal is. To them, it's Native American or American Indian. From my understanding, the nations down there embrace the terms. And to me, I always say, if that's your choice, go ahead. And up here, legally in the Constitution, it is known as Aboriginal. From my understanding, before 2015, with Calvin Helen's book, he used the word Indigenous to describe the people original to the Americas. So it would be ignoring the border of Canada, United States, Mexico, and going down all the way to South America, because you have countries of Brazil, Peru, etc. It's basically the people who were of the land originally all this time, ignoring colonial borders and boundaries there. So he used it for that term, and I liked it at the time. And then, as you know, in 2015, they dropped the name, federally speaking, they dropped the name of Aboriginal from, well, the Department of what they called Aboriginal Affairs and became Department of Indigenous Affairs. And I think from my understanding, they wanted to go with that instead. But the big thing is when I said back at the earlier there I really like that you keep that map up there, is which territorial land that you're at. And so here is, if you're asking me, what do I identify with? I would tell you, I'm Mi'kmaq. Yeah, I fall into it, the Canadian colonial broad definition of Indigenous. But to me, is before I tell people I'm Indigenous, I tell people I'm Mi'kmaq. Then if they ask me what is Mi'kmaq, and because I will get that I usually get that when I go to Europe, ironically. So if they ask me what's Mi'kmaq, I tell them it's the Indigenous people or the Aboriginal people of Eastern Canada. And that's how I usually explain it to them there. But by default, I always say Mi'kmaq. Um, when I spoke at another event back in October, the person who recruited me was speaking with someone else, and they kept saying, "I think it's important we have an Indigenous speaker. I think it's important we have an Indigenous speaker." And I was talking to my wife about this, and my wife is Irish, and I was speaking to her about this, and I said, "Yes, yeah, I said, yeah, I guess it would be good to have an Indigenous speaker to come in, but I said if we're here, it's more important to have a Mi'kmaq speaker come in." And that's what I say about it there. If you're looking for an Indigenous speaker, I'm trying to think who I would probably say, hey, buddy from Coast Salish territory. They're looking for someone who's Indigenous. I know this is way out of your territory. It's all the way elsewhere, but they're looking for you about this one there. But they would be talking about their history and their culture and their traditions. Whereas if we're here in their venue and facilities in Mi'kmaq territory, I would say ask for a Mi'kmaq speaker. So that's always for me. I always just say, yeah, there's a category called Indigenous rights, but I always say Mi'kmaq rights because the rights, because of the treaties and the history of the land, is going to differ from here as you travel out west there. Again, I don't know if I danced around the question, but I hope I pointed in the right answer with it. Okay. Yeah. 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 I believe so, at least with respect to Nova Scotia. Again, and unfortunately, I would not know enough about Prince Island, Eastern New Brunswick, and Gaspé Peninsula, but at least, yes, with Quebec, Nova Scotia, I'm sorry, with Nova Scotia, we do have the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, which acts as a voice on behalf of the Mi'kmaq with respect to Nova Scotia. And I do believe that they were in the process of trying to reclaim or have some things returned here to the region. I know before the pandemic, I did a little bit of work with them on, I think, a Mi'kmaq blanket that's in some museum in Australia. Somebody out of the blue contacted somebody out of the blue who reached out to me and they said, Jarvis, you're Mi'kmaq. I'm like, yeah, I am. Why? What's up? I have a friend of a friend of a friend who works in a museum in Australia. They have this Mi'kmaq blanket that's been here for decades. And I'm like, why is it there? But long story short, the assembly is aware of it. They are looking to bring it over. There were some things, and again, this is pre-pandemic, so I don't know if it just went on the wayside there, but I do understand there were just some issues to ensure that when it arrived here, actually, I think it was the Australian government who said, we do want to send it, but when it arrives here, it goes directly to the Mi'kmaq. It cannot be seized or by costumes. It cannot go under any other process that could potentially damage it. So Australia, I believe, was ready to send it back here. They want to make sure the Canadian government would comply with it and be respectful of it as well too. And I think that from my understanding, the leadership had to work with that as well. I understand, and this is another reason I want to go to DC sometimes. I understand I think it's Smithsonian. There's quite a few Mi'kmaq items in their museums as well. I'm not sure how far along we are in terms of trying to have those things returned. It's funny because when I was younger, you would think Indiana Jones was the coolest thing ever, and when you get older, I'm like, this guy just stole from Native people. That's all he did. He's not a hero. They should reboot that series where he has like a daughter who robs museums to return the items back to original indigenous people. That is like 5 movies right there worth $200 million each. Why not? Yeah. Was there a hand up earlier? It's interesting you said that because this is something I didn't grow up with. Because growing up, I was only in Unamagi for the most part, and I heard of some reserves in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Did not really gone. I have not really visited them or seen them as a child growing up. Because basically, well, we were poor, so we just didn't casually drive out there. But it's like I would hear of Restigouche so much. And then as I got older, I found out, oh, there's more Mi'kmaq communities in Quebec. It's not just Restigouche. And so, when talking about the territory, I actually chatted a lot and did some extra research on this actually just last month for Mi'kmaq History Month because I didn't want to post about something I wasn't sure about. So spoke with elders, looked at some books, and basically a lot of our territory. So if you look at the map up there with the districts, you'll see some lines here and there. They were, as I was told and educated on, they're approximate rough lines, not strict ones per se, but they are approximate along those ways because they flow. They go with natural flows of water, because natural flows of water are usually the best way to have historically, at least within this territory, having boundaries of where animals would be, where game would be, where fishing would be, and so those districts you would see would have district chiefs as well. And amongst all those district chiefs, usually there was a Mi'kmaq Grand Chief as well. That is another big pile of history to get into there. But to sum it up, basically it was waterways that would break it up there. And I think the St. John River was probably the most grand inland way to define and break up a territory there before it goes into Wolastoqey, Malisa territory. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Powwow in Millbrook about 4 years, 3 or 4 years ago,
Okay.
and they had a drum circle, and all the guys in the drum circle were singing a really high pitched.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if there's a special name for that or not, but uh, so they went on for quite a few minutes, maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes with high pitched singing, and all of a sudden it just stops really quickly. So to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people, it all sounded the same as they're singing because it's just hard to understand what they're saying
Yeah.
because it's so high pitched and everything. So how can you talk a little bit about that? How that's done? Are they singing actual words, and how are they doing that when they know how to stop
Yeah.
just like that?
I'll say this with straight out. I'm not a drummer. This might shock people, but I'm not much of a powwow person. I don't attend them. No. And I appreciate you asking. I'm going to answer it a bit there, because the other thing, one of my main resources I use with history, culture, language was Bernie Francis' The Language of This Land, Mi'kmaq, which it's not strictly an English to Mi'kmaq translation, vice versa per se. The book is written in a way I like. It's logistics, sorry, not logistics, linguistics, breakdown and meaning of it. There is a section there about singing. Now, I always meant to actually reach out to Bernie because I know the Mi'kmaq Honor Song, we may have heard it here and there. That's not an old song. It's very, very recent. The creator of that song is still alive. It's not, it's so it's, and I mean all due respect to the song, like it's very recent. It's not old Mi'kmaq, as I like to call it. We do have songs that from my knowledge, predate contact, essentially. I'm curious about those songs. I'm curious about, do we know the meanings behind those words? So I'm hoping to get a chance to chat with Bernie Francis about time and say, could you break this down for me? I'm curious, why were our songs like that way back then, before European contact? That's just more of my, that's where kind of like my interests lie there. You had your hand up? Yeah. 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 I would say this. go with someone. Yeah, go with someone. For me, it's and this is sad because I've been with my wife since 2013. I never had and it's usually just timing. Usually, so if I were to go, I went to the island outside Pictou there, Malagomish, once in my life. The island I normally would go to is just outside St. Peter's, Boatladek, Chapel Island. I went there as a child all my life growing up. I do see non-native people there on occasion. Usually my guess is they probably might come with someone to visit the island there. I guess for me, if I was operating a boat and taking people to the island, if I saw a non-native person come in on their own, for me, I don't question it. Like, oh, you're just here to check this out, kind of thing here. That's the way I would see it. But like I said, if yeah, I don't see that. I don't see it as an intrusion because to me, I see it as an opportunity of people want to learn. It's kind of like when we have when it happens, and it happened a bit before COVID. We used to have massive Maui Omi powwows on the Halifax Commons there. We didn't just do it for us. We wanted it there on the Commons because we want other people to come to our singing, to our dancing, to come to our vendors, to learn and to explore. And to me, that's the way I also kind of see it with the St. Anne's Island missions there that you're talking about. So before I conclude and finish, I do want to share something. I'm kind of breaking my own rule here, but I think you might like it. In 2009, Donald Marshall Jr. passed away. And at that approximate same time, the Assembly of First Nations just elected Sean Atleo as their national chief. And I think because it was the death of someone who was significant and important to the Mi'kmaq Nation, I'm guessing politically he was advised, go to the funeral. And then he shows up here, and I think somebody said, hey, you should say a few words. And it was one of the most beautiful things I ever heard. I'm going to tell you what he said. So Sean Atleo's people, his nation, is, I understand, Northern British Columbia. I do not remember the name of it off the top of my head. But he said something that fascinated me. And I think this would be a great, great thing to look into someday for an amateur linguist. He said in the language of his people, the word for love and the word for pain are the same word. He said the reason for that is you will never you'll never go through life without going through love, without knowing what pain is. You will not know what pain is until you know what love is. When you love something, and then when you lose something, you feel something. That's why in his people's language, it is the same word. And here in Mi'kmaq, the word for I love you is kisalu. And the word for I hurt you is kisalu. It's very similar. So I always was curious with indigenous languages throughout the North America about the word for love and word for pain, because Sean Atleo's people are all the way out west, and the Mi'kmaq people are all the way out east. And I like to always ask myself, how is it possible that we have these similar rules in our languages when before European contact, that's a long, long walk, a very long walk. I'm not canoeing that way. We didn't have horses either. So I'm always curious about that. And I'm always wondering if there will be an inspired linguist out there someday who would like to undertake a massive study to see if they can work from the East Coast to the West Coast of North America, learn about the words for love and pain, or I love you and I hurt you. And so when I say that is, I definitely don't think there was any pain today. I really loved doing all this for all of you. So we'll all dukum sit when. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jarvis. We appreciate that very, very much. So I think we all leave here with a bit more knowledge and a better understanding of where we are, what territory we're on, and the land that we're on. So next Sunday, when we read the acknowledgement of land, I think we have a better understanding of what we're doing, right? Yeah. So that's awesome. So thank you so much, Jarvis, and we hope to see you back here again someday. All right. Thank you.